On this special edition of Daily Gospel, we're going to be talking about the resurrection. Is it a historical fact? Welcome to Daily Gospel, equipping you to know God through His Word and His Son, Jesus Christ. Well, today we want to take some time to talk about the resurrection. It is Holy Week, and we always get a lot of questions about the resurrection. And specifically today, we wanted to address, is it a historical fact? Did it actually happen? Does it need to happen? Is it essential to the Christian faith?
Absolutely, yeah. I always want to address this in the sermon, but there's so many great arguments for the resurrection that you can never do it justice,
Right.
while also just laying out the gospel for people. So I figured this is a way we can touch on this topic. The resurrection is just so well attested to historically. It's such an amazing proof of the truth of Christianity, and it really is the central doctrine of Christianity,
Right.
in a sense, right? It's the central event, I guess you could say, that shows the validity of Christianity.
Right.
So everything hangs upon this, and of course, this is the proof that Jesus Christ paid for our sins. That He gives us new life. It's the vindication of God, His victory over sin and death.
Right.
It's a huge deal.
Right. Essential. So, I guess that's the question that we want to address today. So, is the resurrection, believing that it physically happened, is that actually essential for Christian faith? Is it clearly attested to in the Bible? Do we have to believe it actually happened in the course of history? And like the question that you always get, do we have to believe this, that it physically happened? Is there evidence for that physically in the world? Or do we just believe it on faith, right?
Yeah,
So let's get into some of those kind of questions.
Because my answer would obviously be, my first answer would be to say, well, the Bible is true, so what it says is true, so of course I believe in the resurrection.
Right.
But that may not be super satisfying for some people, right? And I understand that.
So is there more evidence
Yeah.
that we can look at?
And there absolutely is, yeah.
Maybe some extra biblical context, but even just looking at the context of the Bible and the story itself, is there stuff we can glean to actually be sure that the resurrection is physically and historically true?
Yeah, so obviously many, many books have been written, right? Whole tomes have been written on this topic. And so we're just going to talk about some of the basic ideas to help you to think through this topic and to see that there's actually a logical reason to believe in the resurrection. So first, I think it's good to start with the facts. What are the things that we can agree upon? What are the things that we can even agree upon with people that are not Christians?
Did Jesus actually exist at all?
Yeah, so that would be a fact, right? Heavily attested to. But more than that, we can say that Jesus died on the cross. That is a fact of history, attested to by many witnesses right after the time of His death. So, and we know that, blood and water came out when He was stabbed in the side. We know that He was beaten to a pulp. We know that he suffered a miserable death on the cross. And so that is a historical fact, right? That's one of the things that we can say. We also can say, maybe even more importantly, that a few days after his death, His tomb was empty.
Right, His body was gone.
We can say that as a historical fact because Jesus had many, many enemies. And those enemies, in trying to disprove the resurrection accounts, all they would have had to do to disprove that is to bring Jesus' body out.
Yeah, produce the body.
So that never happens. And in fact, the enemies of Jesus, the opponents of Jesus in that first century, are admitting that the tomb is empty. That's never disputed by anyone. It's only disputed maybe, well after the fact, thousands of years later, right? Like in our day now. People might say that, but at that time, that's when they could have brought the body forth, and they didn't, because the entire basis of Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Right.
So it's this simple, right? I mean, Paul actually says in 1 Corinthians 15:17, he says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile, and you are still in your sins. So he literally says, if you can disprove this one point, everything I'm saying to you falls apart.
Right.
So I always think of this as like in the Star Wars movies, they build into the Death Star a fatal flaw, right? If you just shoot this one little missile right here, it all blows up. And they build it like that multiple times. Anyway, but that's not the point.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like the resurrection. And Paul's actually broadcasting that. He's saying if you can just hit this one key doctrine, everything falls apart.
Right. And I'm sure Romans and the Jews would have heard this news, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Public,
so I mean, he's saying this loudly. Everyone knows this who's read the Bible. So why wouldn't they just produce the body? So the tomb was empty. Right. We know that for sure. The other thing we know is that the disciples believed they had experiences of the resurrected Christ soon after his death. So we know this, that the resurrection wasn't a product of Christianity later on.
Right.
It wasn't an invention when they said, oh, we really like Jesus. Oh, we should say he rose from the dead.
Right.
Because the accounts of resurrection, the claims of resurrection are so close. Right?
Oh, yeah.
The historical accounts we have are so close to his death. We also know the disciples had an incredible witness to Jesus. They lived amazing lives. They died horrible deaths to witness to Jesus. That is a very interesting fact of history. And we know, of course, that their witness was very close to the death of Christ, right? It was immediately after. It was within, 40, 50 days after the death of Christ, they were testifying to his resurrection.
Right. So there's still like a lot of ways you can explain those facts, right? There's still a lot of like somersaults that people do to explain how this actually happened, or, maybe the Roman soldiers fell asleep or something like that. You hear a lot of random stories about why the plain reading of the text is not true.
Yeah.
And why Jesus didn't have to physically resurrect from the dead. So let's dig into some of those explanations and talk about, some of those common reasons that people bring up, for saying the resurrection isn't true.
For sure, yeah.
So the first one, Jesus just really didn't die.
Yeah.
Like he was unconscious or something after his crucifixion or something like that. So yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so this is one that I don't think is as widely put forth anymore, because it has some huge problems, right? So you have somebody who was, like we said, beaten to a pulp, lashed 40 times with these, brutal instruments, not just a whip, but it had shards of glass and pieces of metal. He was, severe blood loss over the course of hours. He was hung on a cross by his wrists and his feet for hours, where he slowly suffocated to death.
Right.
All of this was overseen by the killing experts of their time, Roman soldiers, right, who did this all the time. This was their job. He was stabbed in the side to make sure he was dead, and blood and water came out, which is a sign that essentially his heart burst.
Right.
So it's possible, this theory would say that this man, after 3 days in a tomb with no food and no water, woke up,
Possible.
took off his own grave clothes,
Possible.
right? Took off the spices or whatever was on him, pushed aside a massive stone, fought off a whole troop of Roman soldiers without weapons and naked, and escaped. That would be the theory. And I would say that's an explanation, but maybe not the best explanation. That's a little far-fetched, right?
Yeah.
So given the historical facts that we know, that's impossible. That's an impossible account.
It's a little far-fetched.
Right? Very far-fetched,
yeah. So crazy. So, okay, I think it's safe to say explanation number one debunked, yeah? Mm-hmm. So Jesus, wasn't just passed out for a while. He actually really died because what he had to go through would kill someone.
Yes.
So explanation number two that I want to debunk is that the disciples, the followers of Jesus, were just hallucinating. And so therefore, they actually believed what they said they were seeing and stuff, but they were just hallucinating.
Yeah. So this is a common one as well. And again, it seems to have a lot of merit. Haven't there been many times in history where people have hallucinated? People have thought they'd seen something and they hadn't actually seen it, right? We have lots of examples of those. We don't have any examples that I'm aware of at this scale. So Jesus didn't just appear to them one time. He appeared to them about 10 times. He appeared to them over a period of 40 days. He appeared to over 500 people, according to 1 Corinthians 15. So large numbers of people over a large period of time, multiple times. Not only that, but he spent time with them. He ate with them. He talked with them. They touched him.
Right.
They had real interactions with him. So you'd have to have mass hallucinations.
Well, DMT is a crazy drug. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah. So you'd have to have these hallucinations at a huge scale over a long period of time, including very similar detail. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And let's be careful not to go to a place. Some people will go to this place of, well, these people were stupid, so they could have been easily duped. These people, these men, produced some of the most important, intellectually rigorous, and profound and history-shaping documents ever. Yeah. So we can't just say, oh, they were dumb.
Like you frequently say, the Bible is the best-selling book in all of history and is today. So,
Yeah. So it could be because they were just really dumb and they got lucky.
Right.
I don't know, but of course not. You read it and you see the logic to it. Even if you don't agree with it, you have to admit the beauty.
I think that's a good point. Like, even if you don't agree with it, like, it's hard to refute the facts and the logic of, that they were not hallucinating. It doesn't make any sense,
Yeah.
Explanation number 2 debunked.
I think so.
Okay. Explanation number 3, that Jesus' body was actually stolen.
Yes. So this one seems like the most obvious reason. So this seems like probably the hardest one to debunk. So we'll go into this a little more detail. But I do believe this is not a good answer. Okay, so there's a couple reasons why. So reason number 1 would be the Roman guard.
Right.
So the Roman guard, as we mentioned, this is a troop of the best trained soldiers in the world. These are the men who conquered the greatest empire up to that point in history.
This is like SEAL Team 7, right?
So, these guys are good. These and we have no ancient account of or claim that they fought off the guards, but that's what would have had to happen. They would have fought off a troop of Roman soldiers. This is probably not 2 guards. It's probably anywhere from a dozen to 50. These were the best of the best. So you could have a band of barely armed and untrained, peasants versus the best soldiers in the world. That would have been what had to happen. Now, at the time of the resurrection, the Bible tells us that the lie that was spread was not that they fought off the Roman soldiers, but that Roman soldiers were asleep when they came to the tomb. So that's in Matthew 28:11 to 15. That's the lie that they spread, and that's what was believed in the early first century. Now, that is maybe even more unbelievable because for Roman soldiers, if you were guarding a prisoner and you lost the prisoner, you died.
Right.
So there's no mercy. If you were guarding someone or something and you fell asleep, you died.
That's a pretty tough job description, huh?
Yeah, so they couldn't lean on anything. They couldn't sit down. These guys were standing guard, a whole team of them. And I've even heard accounts, I haven't been verifying this, but I've heard accounts that if one person in the troop fell asleep on the job, then they could all die.
Oh, wow.
So either way, these are people that know how to stay awake. They know how to stay guard, and you'd have to have every single one of them falling asleep.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. And then the disciples have to move a massive stone blocking the entrance without waking even one of the guards up. You and I, we have babies. You know what it's like trying to get a change of clothes in your room when your baby's sleeping in the bassinet. It's like, oh no, anything, right? So of course not. That's very far-fetched that these guys would have been so negligent to make that happen. So that's one problem. The other problem is the folded clothes. So we see in the description in the Gospels that the clothes were folded up. So there's kind of 2 ways to interpret that. One is to say that they were folded into a nice, neat pile. The other one was that they're still in their folds, meaning they're still, these strips of cloth that wrapped Jesus were still in the same shape they were in, but there's just no body in them.
Right.
Either way, this poses a big problem, right? Because this couldn't have been a robbery, because a friend wouldn't have done this and an enemy wouldn't have done this.
Right.
A friend wouldn't have done this because if the disciples were stealing Jesus' body because they loved him and cared about him, they wouldn't dishonor his body by stripping him naked. That would be desecration to the body.
Right.
A robber, an enemy, someone with a bad motive wouldn't do this either. Because if you're committing a crime, who takes time to stop and to unwrap and rewrap? It doesn't make any sense, right? So if you're committing a capital offense, stealing a body, well, why would you take time to do this? It doesn't make any sense. So that's the problem. The biggest problem, though, I think,
I agree with this one,
is the transformed disciples.
Yeah.
The disciples and the way they live their lives, the power of their testimony, it requires an answer. It really does. It requires us to think deeply about why they lived lives this way. They lived extraordinary lives where they laid down their lives for the cause.
Right.
Why would they do that, right? There's a few answers as to why you would steal the body of Jesus, make up your own religion.
You get power of some degree.
Yeah. So if you're going to start a cult, which I'm sure, all of us want to start a cult. No, I'm just kidding. It's super weird, but there are people that do this, right? you would design the cult in a way where you get something out of it.
Right.
If you knew this was fake, you would design it so where you get wealth or power or something, right? L. Ron Hubbard, the famous science fiction writer who started Scientology, he said, you don't get rich writing science fiction. If you want to get rich, you start a religion. Now, of course, in his case, the religion was also science fiction. So he kind of did multitask there.
Best of both worlds, yeah.
Yeah, but he was worth, a ton of money because he was able to force people to buy his books in order to,
right.
I watched the Waco miniseries, and this David Koresh figure, right, who's the head of this cult, right? I mean, it was this weird cult, the Branch Davidians. In the miniseries, I don't know if this actually happened, but one of the ATF agents who's on the phone with David Koresh is talking to him about this religion that he invented, or this kind of sect or cult. And he asked the question, right, when God speaks to men, why does he always tell them to sleep with lots of women? Right, because he would sleep with all the people, all the women on the thing. And in other words, why is it that in these cults, there's always a specific gain to that person? It always gives them what they want, power or sex or money or something.
Right.
And with the disciples, they didn't get any of that.
Yeah, is that the kind of life that they led?
I mean, they didn't get any of that.
Yeah.
So, looking at their lives, every single one of them died for their faith. Died for their faith, right? Minus only John, who was exiled. And as the sword was on their necks, they proclaimed to their captors, to their executors, that Jesus is Lord and Jesus is risen.
Right.
All they had to do to avoid that fate is to recant.
Right.
So these weren't guys who were saying, what can I get out of this life? And these are guys like Paul who were saying, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. Right? Whatever gain I had, I counted as loss for the sake of Christ. I've suffered the loss of all things and consider them rubbish. Right? Philippians 3. I mean, Paul's faith was demonstrated in that way.
Right.
The message wasn't believe in Jesus or give us lots of money and you can get saved. It was, no, we don't want your money.
Right.
I mean, there are plenty of accounts of them saying, don't give us money to try to buy this faith.
Right. No, the faith is free. It's given. It's communicated. So.
Yeah, and I would challenge anyone listening to this, find me one thing that these disciples gained in their lives by lying about the resurrection of Jesus.
Right.
You can't find one thing. And it's not just, because I know there's been singular people who have been crazy, who have done something, but this is a dozen men, and of course the followers as well, the hundreds who saw Jesus, going to death because of this belief.
Yeah, study even an overview of the first 400 years of the church. Like, there's a lot of suffering from the followers of the faith.
Yes.
And they're not gaining anything culturally. Like in the last 100 years in America, you generally gain cultural status by being a Christian. This was not the case.
Yeah.
And
this included the founders of the religion, not guys that were brainwashed by the founders.
Right.
These were the founders of the religion. So this resurrection wasn't an excuse to start a religion, right? It was fuel that lit a fire in these men to give everything, to suffer, to go to the ends of the earth, to leave all comfort behind in order to spread this message, right? So the resurrection wasn't an excuse for personal gain. It was motivation to endure personal loss at a high level.
Right.
So nothing in history that I'm aware of comes close to the transformation that you see in the lives of disciples after this encounter they had with the resurrected Christ.
100%.
So again, why would they lie in order to gain nothing? I think this is often brought up in talks of resurrection, but the testimony of Chuck Colson, who was part of the Watergate scandal, right, decades ago, and he was part of this conspiracy to, everyone knows the story, right, but to spy on their opponents, and only a few people were involved in the plot, but it was quickly uncovered.
Right.
As soon as there was an investigation, people started to cave, right? When there's any pressure applied to them, they began to cave. And Chuck Colson became a Christian in prison, but he famously said that his experience with Watergate showed him that the resurrection must be true. Because he said a group of people, a tight-knit group, wouldn't stay together on something that was false.
Right.
They would seek personal gain. And in fact, this quote, he says, men and women do not give up their comfort and certainly not their lives for what they know to be a lie. So I think all of those explanations fall flat, and the best explanation of the evidence, historically speaking, is that Jesus was resurrected.
So did Jesus rise from the dead historically, physically? Fact check.
True.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we just scratched the surface of talking about this. There's even more topics we could talk about, and more importantly, we didn't even get to why you need to believe in the resurrection to have eternal life in Jesus. That's something we didn't even scratch the surface for. But if you want to learn about that, you can come to our Sunday services, Easter, and then just every Sunday, go to church, hear the good news of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
and,
we also have a series on the Gospel of John. We spent, I think, 8 weeks on the resurrection accounts and into the theology of all this stuff. So check those out as well.
Yeah, so if you want to learn about why the resurrection is important, come to church, go look at our sermons, and just keep listening to Daily Gospel. We talk about the resurrection of Jesus Christ in the gospel every week. So anyway, thanks for joining us. That's all we got time for today, and I hope you learned a little bit about why the resurrection is a historical fact.